Howdy, everybody. Um, so I guess I didn't play my horn this time. That's twice now. All right, so I hop on here and look at all this stuff from Anthony and Jordan. That's great. We're gonna jump right into it. You know what? That's cool because this was the first time we weren't gonna answer questions from like during the week. I decided we're not doing that anymore. So when you ask me, I'm not saying don't ask me questions, right? During the week. If you want an email from me, I'll send me an email. If you want to put a question in the comments, I'll answer in the comments from now on. It just didn't feel right the other way. So Anthony has a story for us. I'm going to read it for the people who might not be, when people watch later, they don't always see the chat thing on the side. So I'm going to read this. Anthony says, I have a bittersweet story about my favorite trumpet player, Louis Armstrong. I just happened to be in Manhattan the day Mr. Armstrong was on view after he passed away. A lady asked me, where is Satchmo? Lady then explained he was laid out in the New York Armory. I can't say that. Armory. So I went to pay my respects. Felt good to have seen my idol. But when I got home, told my mom and my aunt I saw Louis, my aunt told me, did you ask him to give you some of his talent for your playing? My aunt was sarcastic, never said anything nice about my playing. And then I'm going to skip. Moral of the story is parents, families should try to encourage their children. Yeah. That's a great story, Anthony. Thank you for sharing that. I have this thing that I teach, and it started off with sight reading, but it's morphed into this philosophy that I have now, and I apply it to marriage. I apply it to everything in life, right? I call it overlapping responsibilities, right? And you're right. Parents should be more careful. Families should be more careful about the stuff that they say. But I also think, on the other hand, that we have a responsibility. You see what I'm saying? Let me back up and tell you where this philosophy came from, right? I was on a gig. Now, remember, I'm a composer. I was on a recording session, and the guys in the studio, the musicians, were complaining. And I'm not going to use musician language. My mom would call it barracks language. We grew up on bass. My mom would say, leave your barracks language in the barracks, right? So the guys would say, who wrote this? Look at this. This is wrong. This is not playable, right? And so then I had the opportunity, because I am a composer, to hang out with the guy that wrote the music in the other room right there, right? And he's going, these guys suck. They can't play anything, right? And I'm thinking, there's like a war going on here, right? You've got these people on the one side blaming the guy that wrote the music for the fact that they can't play it. And then they've got then the guy that wrote the music is blaming them for the music, right? And what I learned out of that is that we have to take our responsibility seriously. So if me as a parent, I take your story and I say, it's my job to say the right things to my son at the right times, so that I can lift him up, right? But also, there are times when my son needs to take responsibility and not let stuff bother him, right? But yes, I understand your story, man. That's a great story. That's a great story. And you know what? I think if I understand you right, you're saying because this was your favorite musician and this was a awesome experience for you. Well, I get maybe awesome is not the right word for it. And you went and shared you went and shared that with your family and you got that as a response. And basically what happened is that your aunt um kind of unvalidated, whatever you want to call that, your experience with this. So I can appreciate that. Jordan says, I've recently started using wedge breathing for compression when playing. I find it does help with the acceleration of air, but I always seem to get dizzy when doing it. Okay. So Jordan has two questions. We're going to talk about that one first. Let me first say that I'm not a fan of wedge breathing. That doesn't mean people shouldn't do it. I'm just not a fan. And let me explain why I'm not a fan before we talk about this. And there's people that say, no, Eddie, you're wrong. You can. If they don't say that I'm wrong. They say that I'm. I'm sorry. Something went down the wrong way. They don't say that I'm wrong. The way they get angry with me, right? Because it's almost as if what they're saying is what I'm saying is not a big deal. Well, it is a big deal if you're looking at quality playing. Okay, so the problem I have with the wedge breathing is that you're using, instead of muscular power on the air, you're using more of I don't know what to call it, kinetic or something. You're stretching the rib cage, you're stretching the upper body. And what's coming out is not under your 100% control. And that's fine if you're playing lead trumpet, right? And you want to have that zing over the top of the band. The wedge breathing does the job. Okay? You get that zing. But where I see that it breaks down with the students. Now, I'm not talking about the pros that do this and are successful with it. Congratulations, right? They're making this work. Me personally, and for my students, there's a time when that, and for lack of a better, I don't know a better way to explain it, but that kinetic energy that's pushing the air out, as you get through the phrase, it gets less and less, and you have to then compensate by now, like switching gears. It's like switching gears to another gear, right? So you're what's supporting the note once you get to that point is what everyone else is supporting with is your musculature, right? But you have that change in the source of the airflow. And in my opinion, as you're doing that change, it is manifested in the tone quality on the horn. Now, the people who don't have that have worked years to make that adjustment, but still, if you just look at the theory of it, you're using something. It's the same reason why I don't like to do high note exercises. When you do high note exercises, you're doing something different to get the notes. In this case, when we're doing wedge breathing, we're doing something physically different from what you normally do to get that zing going, right? And when that happens, the tone is not the same. So what you inevitably have, because if you have a phrase that's long enough that you run out of that, you're going now to this other sound. And yes, a lot of people will say, no, Eddie, you're wrong. This doesn't happen. Well, that's what I'm trying to say. I know Bobby Shue does wedge breathing, or yoga breathing and wedge breathing are very much similar, right? So you have people like Bobby Shue that do it and it works well. And there are other people who do it and it works well. But the number of people who do it and it doesn't work well, there's far more of those. That's what I'm trying to say. And here's the problem with this, right? Is most of the people that pick up the wedge breathing that I know about are doing it as a shortcut. They're not doing it because they like that sound. They're doing it as a shortcut because they can't, with their regular muscular setup, they can't get things to happen the way they want them to happen. And so, no, I'm not a big fan. I know how to do it. I don't like it. And but what I will tell you is that I'm not an expert on it because I don't do it. Right? And there are times when I will do something similar. So that said, if you are the kind of person that really likes that sound, I would strongly recommend that you really emphasize. So here's my biggest criticism of the people. Let me turn this light off. My biggest criticism of people who use wedge as a shortcut is that they have no style. They've got no note shape. They've got no phrasing. And everything is just one volume. It's like that old movie, I forget the name of it, where they turn the amps up to 11, right? It's like everything is just at your loudest volume always, right? And that's, if you understand what style is, what phrasing is, and all that stuff, anytime you play like that, there is no style. So in order to use wedge breathing and also be musical at the same time, you've got to do, it can't be a shortcut. You've got to dedicate a huge amount of time to making that work, learning how to make it musical. Okay? That's my biggest no. So I know that your question is about getting dizzy, okay? Probably if you're getting dizzy, you're doing something wrong with the wedge breathing. Probably doing something wrong. And the dizziness comes from puffing up your neck. The neck puffs up and it cuts off your arteries. Actually, okay, so there's two kinds of dizziness. You could be are you getting dizzy while you do it, or you're getting dizzy after you do it? If you get dizzy after you do it, that's that whole, I forgot what it's called. It starts with an H. Has to do with blood pressure. So if you have a tremendous amount of blood pressure going to your head, and then you stop, that's what the wedge does to you, right? So what might be happening with the wedge is you might be doing it too much. That's possible. If you're getting dizzy while you're playing, it's because the arteries on the neck are getting pinched from the neck expanding from the air pressure. If you get dizzy afterwards, it's because you're getting too much blood pressure to the head. Okay. But if you are going to, that's two things I have to say about the wedge. If you're going to do it right. Don't use it as a shortcut. And if you're going to do it right, invest the time and the effort to make it right. Okay? So that's me. I'm genuine. I do not have a problem with people using wedge. Okay? I don't like it, and I don't like my students to do it. But if my student really, really, really wants to do it, nobody has yet. But if my students really, really want to do it, we'll still do it. And I'll learn more about it if someone wants to do it. Because that's how I teach. But so far I haven't had to do that yet. So that's the first thing. Invest the time. Make sure you're doing it right. And you know when you're doing it right is when you can have all that power that comes from the wedge, and you can be musical at the same time. Nice vibrato, note shape, phrasing, all of that beautiful stuff that great trumpet players do, right? Okay. Do you know what? Before we move on, I want to remind everybody. I haven't told you guys yet, so it's not reminding you. I'm letting you guys know we're moving up the time because there's a bunch of Europeans that would like to participate, right? And I'm sure the South African guys, I have friends in South Africa, I'm sure the South African guys would like to participate. And 5 o'clock is just way too late for them. So we're going to move it up to 1 o'clock next week. We'll see how that works. All right. And so yeah, we'll do that. Okay, let's go on to Jordan's second question. My other question is, have you ever had experience with jaw position by pushing your jaw forward to align your teeth together when using your lower teeth as an anchor when playing? I'll tell you what, because I have a severe overbite. If I put my molars together, that's how much of an overbite I have. So I have a severe overbite. And I was taught from the beginning. I play with my front jaw, my bottom jaw pushed out to be even. That's how I play. And I'm not even aware of it now because I've been doing it for what, 45 years, right? But yes, I do that. And it's quite frankly, it's something I forget to teach my students because I've been doing it for so long, I forget about it. But yes, the answer to your question is yes. Now I don't know what you mean by anchor. Then using your lower teeth as an anchor while playing. That part I don't understand. I probably don't do that. I don't even know what you mean by that. So is that something that the high note guys do? So for example, if you are trying, because the fact that you know about the wedge breathing means that you probably know also about things like the different embouchures, like the Costello embouchure and stuff like that, right? Because that's what high note guys are into, right? So is that part of that high note embouchure philosophy that you put your because that would make you an upstream player. If you don't have an overbite like I do, and you're trying to, in an artificial way, make yourself into an upstream player because upstream players play high, then I could see how pushing your jaw out would emulate that in an artificial way. I'll tell you what, I've taught beginners that were now you got to understand the way I teach beginners. Now remember, when I'm talking about embouchure, we are looking for your most natural embouchure. Everything I do in regards to embouchure, that's the goal, is to help you find your most natural embouchure, because that's when you're going to be the best player that you can be. Okay? So when you do something that's not natural, it's my opinion that you will, in the long run, not play as well as when you do what is natural. Okay, that's my, and it's a philosophical thing, but that's how I feel. Okay, so if you don't have a overbite, so the overbite thing, you have to correct that to be able to play properly, because the lips with an overbite, the lips have a tendency to do this, and that's not, you can't have that in the trumpet playing. So you push the jaw out so that the lips will do this. Now, back to my story. I taught one time a severe, and the the parents knew that it was best to take the student to the teacher first. They didn't let him touch the instrument. The very first thing he did was right here in this room. He had never been exposed to any trumpet playing whatsoever. And so the father was in high school, was a piano player. The mother was a clarinet player. So they knew that there were mistakes that could happen in those first days. So that's a beautiful experience for a teacher, right? When the parents know that and they bring the student in. And the way I start absolute beginners, what we're looking for in that first lesson is, what is their most natural embouchure? Can you imagine the difference that happens in a student's musical career when you find their most natural embouchure from the beginning? Imagine that. I didn't have that. But my students get that when their parents are wise enough to know this, right? They bring like what happened to this student, right? Now, the way I find out what his most natural embouchure is I go through a process. And it's a lot easier to do this with a beginner than it is with someone who's already been playing, because the beginner hasn't had their wires crossed yet, right? So this guy, from the very beginning, using my system, had an upstream. I'm not exaggerating. It was at this angle, his most natural embouchure, and he didn't have an underbite or anything like that. That was his most natural embouchure. And true to form, right? They say that upstream embouchure people can play high. True to form, his very first notes on the trumpet were between tuning note C and G above the staff. We spent the first 2 years of his trumpet career trying to help him figure out how to play the low notes. That sounds funny for most of us, right? And get this, right? I've actually written about this student before, because the band director wanted all the trumpet students to look the same. And, we're talking about junior high beginning band, right? And he kept telling this student to put the horn down. So the student, because that's his natural embouchure, will put his jaw all the way down to his chest so he can get that angle. So then the guy would yell at him for that. He'd yell at him for that, for putting his chin down. Well, then when he did this, so then when the student would put his chin up and put the horn down, it sounded awful. Which that's what happens when you play on a weird embouchure, right? For him, that was a weird embouchure. That was about as weird as us trying to play like this. So here's somebody, he was like a freshman or a sophomore in high school, and his piece, I forgot the name of it. There's a concerto that was written for Doc Severinsen. Now you got to understand this student didn't practice a lot. He practiced some. He didn't practice a lot because he was one of those guys that was good at everything. He was an Eagle Scout. In fact, he's in the Eagle Scout Hall of Fame or whatever you want to call it. I know they don't have that. I'm just saying. He's kind of famous because he's got more merit badges than he's got like the record in merit badges because he was during a transition. So they had these merit badges at this time and these merit badges at that time. So he had more merit badges than anybody else ever had. He's he was on the swim team. He played soccer. He's with the Sea Scouts, which is not scouts. It's they do stuff, nautical stuff. I don't know what they do. So he was just good at everything, and he excelled at all of it. A+ student, everything. Didn't get the march because swimming was during the same time as marching. But anyway, so we're talking about someone who didn't dedicate his whole life to playing trumpet. But here he is in his sophomore year playing a really hard concerto that was written for Doc Severinsen. And he nailed it. And the reason he nailed it is because it was almost all high notes. And that's his register. That's his natural register. I hope that makes sense. So where does that put us? Once again, like with the wedge stuff, if you're pursuing that because you want to be a great lead player, I don't think the wedge stuff is good for just normal playing. I think it's really designed for lead playing. But the same thing, if you're trying to push your jaw forward because you want an upstream embouchure, once again, I'm not going to tell you don't do that. That's not something I would be helping you do in the lesson necessarily, because what we try to do embouchure-wise in these lessons is to help you find your most natural embouchure, and that's if you have to jut your mouth out to get an upstream so that you can play high, then that's not what's natural for you. I hope that makes sense. Now, I'm not going to say, so this is where me and the high note guys part ways, right? So the high note gurus, that's their thing, they and I'm even going to go as far as to say that if that's your thing, then you probably shouldn't be getting too much advice from me. I hope that makes sense. There's a lot of things that I teach and do well. Now, one of the top things that I won't teach, if someone tells me, Mr. Lewis, I want to be in a professional symphony, I will tell them then you probably shouldn't have me as a teacher. Not because I don't know anything about orchestra, not because I don't have skills for teaching that, but because the people who do that for a living have insight and wisdom that I will never have. Yes, I have experience as an orchestral player. Um, but those guys, I'm gonna say it outright, as orchestra players, they are 100 times better than I am because I made a choice. I made a choice to go in a different direction. Well, the same thing applies to people who want to be screamers. Now, I can teach people how to play lead. You know that lead and scream is not the same thing. Okay? If you don't know that, you need to know that. Being a lead trumpet player and being a screamer, that's why if you look at those Maynard charts, Maynard's chart is fifth. They put all that screaming stuff on the fifth chair. Then the lead stuff is on the first chair. And playing lead is not about playing high notes. Playing lead is about leading the band, and you just happen to have high notes because that's how you lead the band, is by playing those notes that are on the top of the orchestration. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So yeah, when you're playing, if what you're shooting for, I'm specifically talking to you now, Jordan. If you're trying to be a lead player, you're moving in the right direction. Well, not lead player, like a screamer. You know, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that screamers can't play lead. Yes, of course, screamers can play lead. Okay? Lead players can't necessarily scream. I hope you see the logic for that. So if you're trying to be a screamer, you're moving in the right direction. Okay? If you are just doing this because you were on some website and someone said this is a better way to play, then you're not going in the right direction, okay? If you just thought, well, this is just how you play trumpet, no, it's a very specific way to play trumpet for a very specific type of trumpet playing. This is not overall general stuff you're talking about. People don't just in general use wedge breathing, okay? People don't just in general use push their jaw out like that if they don't have an overbite. All right. I hope I answered that. Any other questions? We've got some people hanging out today. That's a good sign. Oh, I missed all of this. Sorry. I've been like, there was a bunch of this. I didn't see these new things come in. So Javier says, what's the difference between the narrow rim mouthpieces that cut your lip versus wider ones? And what's your view on having different mouthpieces for different purposes? Okay, good questions. I like those. The narrow mouthpiece gives you more flexibility. But with flexibility comes a price, okay? First of all, when you have more flexibility, you better have more control, right? You better be putting the note right where it belongs because otherwise it's going to be squirrely. Those notes are going to go all over the place, okay? And the other problem is that you lose your endurance. One of the best ways to practice endurance is to have a thin, narrow rim, okay? And the wide rim, the wider the rim is, the more stable the notes are, but the more that impacts your flexibility. So you won't have as much flexibility with a wider rim, but you'll have more endurance and more accuracy. So that's the and then so the other question is, do I have different mouthpieces for different jobs? And the answer for that is yes, I usually carry 3 mouthpieces. I do like to have exactly the same rim. In fact, they're so similar. The rims are so similar that I can't tell them apart. If I don't look at them, I don't know which ones they are. That's what I'm shooting for. So yes, and so the deep one, now some people think it's for high notes, right? It's not for high notes. I can play just as high on the deep as I can play on the shallow. It's for sound and volume. So you can project more when you have a more shallow mouthpiece. So if I'm playing with a loud band, no matter how high the notes are, I'm putting the shallow mouthpiece in. If it's a soft band, let's say I'm playing, so like I had a gig not long ago, me and a French horn player. Then I put my deepest mouthpiece on, right? So yes, that's how I do that. Paul says, um, is there any way to overcome playing with lots of stress and energy, especially when going higher? So here's the thing about, so I'm one of those guys. I don't know if you've seen my other stuff. I'm not a big fan of relaxing. Okay? I'm not a big fan of relaxing. People will use the word, no man, you just need to relax. And that opens up a big can of worms that can get people in trouble. I do have a video about body tension. So you can look on my channel. Let me see if it comes up that way. If you type my name, Eddie Lewis, and body tension, it should come up as a top video. Yes, it does. Okay. I consider body tension to be, now this is talking in general, not about high notes. Okay. Body tension is more of a mental problem. Okay. That's how I see it. For the high notes, the chances are that you're going too high too soon. Okay? The chances are you're going too high too soon. And the reason I'm saying that is because we have a tendency because, here, and I've said this before in the videos too, it is a myth. It's wrong thinking to think that playing high notes is somehow athletic. It's only athletic up to the high C. Once you have the strength to play high C, the strength you need now to play above that is only a slight bit more than the strength you already have. It's so insignificant in terms of how much more strength you need that it's not even worth talking about the strength side of it. The only reason we do strength building at that range is because of the endurance side of it, not because of the range. The range itself is not the problem. It's keeping your muscles that firm for that long. That's what the problem is. Because you start losing, you're tired, your muscles get tired. So if we approach the high notes as if it is a athletic thing where we have to try harder to get the high notes, invest more physical effort to get the high notes, the lips close up and you end up pushing more air to lips that are overly tight. and it creates, I call it the bath. It's a disgusting analogy, but I can't come up with a better way to say it. It's like sitting on the toilet. In fact, I tell people sometimes you've got that toilet sound again. Toilet sound is when the lips are too tight and you're pushing too hard, right? And it creates a sound. It's not a nice sound. But that's why you're going to have all that tension, is because the note isn't just freely coming out. And that's because this is not right. And the only way you get this right is mentally, not physically. It's not a physical thing. It manifests itself physically. But it's a mental thing that has to happen. And the word I've been using since the 90s to describe that, what happens, is familiarity. You want to become familiar with those notes. You want to become familiar with them. Okay? That's why my routines are built the way they are. Okay? So each of the routine books has different routine ranges, from C in the staff up to G above the staff. And so let's say you have a range that goes up to G above the staff. You're doing everything up to G above the staff. You're doing your long tones up to G above the staff. You're doing your scales up to G above the staff. You're doing your lip slurs up to G above the staff. You're doing your articulation up to G above the staff. And I'm talking about above high C. Every exercise goes up that high. And the reason why we have that is to increase familiarity. You become more familiar with those notes mentally, psychologically, subconsciously. And the aperture size gets controlled more accurately by your subconscious mind. But that's not going to happen if you're playing over your range. If your range is at let's say your top note is F, the top line F, and you're trying to play high C, you're going to have that kind of stress you're talking about, because you're not ready for that yet. You're not familiar with those notes yet. Okay? So I'm sorry, Jordan. I didn't see you talking to me. My screen was stopped there. So he says, after I do it, I get dizzy. So if you're getting dizzy afterwards, it's from too much blood pressure up into your head. Okay? There's a word for that. I forget the word. It's a medical term. Musicality is way more important, he says. I'm always observing tone and the way I sound. So tone is not the same thing as musicality. Let's make that clear, okay? Tone is more of a physical trait. When I talk about musicality, I'm talking about stuff like note shape. I'm talking about phrasing. I'm talking about vibrato. Tone is something altogether different. Okay? There's some people who have gorgeous, beautiful tone and have none of that other stuff, and they sound awful. Okay? All right, Dave says, I've only ever played on the 7C mouthpiece. My trumpet came with it. Do you think it worth trying other sizes? I've been playing for 4 years. Yes, I do think it's worth trying. Depending on where you live, if you can meet someone that has one of those Warburton kits, they can fit you. I would love. Maybe I should call Warburton. I just bought a Warburton mouthpiece. It finally came in the mail. A flugelhorn mouthpiece. I had to get a new flugelhorn mouthpiece to get this, because my old flugelhorn mouthpiece is a American shank. So I bought Warburton because I love the Warburton flugel mouthpiece. Look how deep this is. Woohoo! That's a deep mouthpiece, huh? That's like deeper than a French horn mouthpiece. But yeah, if you can find someone that has a Warburton kit and get them to fit you, help you find what size is right for you, that would be a beautiful experience. And I'm considering calling them. I don't know who we have here in Houston, but you got to think there's thousands of trumpet players in Houston. If they do have someone that does this already, it might be a good idea for me to have a kit too. That would be worth an investment, I think. Um, and when I say worth an investment, I'm talking about on my part. I think you have to buy those kits. Anchor as if there's any pressure. The pressure goes on the bottom lip instead of the out to reduce fatigue in a way. It's part. Yes, I thought so. How did I know? Jordan says it's part of the Roy Stevens embouchure. Okay. So he's Jordan says he was only doing lead for the wedge for the lead stuff. Yeah, screaming rather than lead. And you know what? I'm not one of those guys. There's a lot of people out there that are anti-screamers. Like like you know, I've never been like that. I've done some screaming myself. I don't like to do it, but I can enjoy someone else who's doing it. Um, you know, when you're playing in a salsa band, really you got to be a screamer, in my opinion. And I played salsa for 20 years. Every time they gave me a solo, I did the screaming stuff. So, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you like. And the last time I had a trumpet student who said that's how he wanted to play was, I guess, about 12 years ago. And we embraced that in his lessons. We went full-fledged into the high note thing. So it's not like I hate that stuff. I'm not going to say I hate it. It's just I do things a lot differently because I am more of a lead player. When it comes to the high notes, I am more of a lead player. Anthony says, gold mouthpiece serve a purpose. You know what? The gold mouthpiece is supposed to be, well, one thing it does is it warms up faster. That's definitely one purpose. So it gets to your body temperature faster. That's what I've heard. But it's also if you have a like an allergy to brass or something, people will put it because gold. That's why they make surgical equipment and stuff out of gold. Is there cannot be, it doesn't have any interaction with the cells. Is there a musical purpose? No. There's no musical purpose for having a gold mouthpiece. The layer of gold is so tiny over it's like microscopic layer. That's why they can charge you so little. Right? I mean, if it was a thicker layer, they'd be charging you a whole bunch more for that. Okay, James says, I am currently using a loaner trumpet and would like to buy my own trumpet. Does lead pipe bore size affect sound, tone, responsiveness, etc.? Yes, it does. I'm one of those people who can't play on a medium large. I used to. There have been certain things in my career when I would be trucking along, right, and not making any progress, no progress, no progress, and then something happened, and boom! All of a sudden, I'm a better player. Getting a large bore trumpet was one of those things. It was like, overnight, all of a sudden, when I bought it, my first large bar I bought from my teacher at the time. And he says, you be expecting to have some endurance problems at first. And that makes sense because you're going from less resistance, more resistance to less resistance. But that's not how it happened for me. I actually got more endurance when I went to the large bore. So I consider myself a natural large bore player. But yes, the answer to your question is yes, it does affect it. And what you want to do, if you live someplace that you can try different instruments, you want to go try them. Now, here's the thing though. Depending on how long you've been playing, the trying thing doesn't help much because you can't play yet. If you have only been playing a while, let's say a year or two, you're not really in a place yet where you can tell the difference from one to the other. And you won't actually know until later. That's why we have a tendency as beginners to buy instruments that are kind of middle of the road. So like the Bach 37, I think is the standard Bach. The reason why we buy the Bach 37 is because it's middle of the road. It's not too small. It's like Goldilocks, right? It's not the big bed. It's not the little bed. It's the one that's just right, right? And when you get more advanced and you know more who you are as a player, then you can make a decision about those internal qualities of the instrument. Okay. Javier says, is there any benefit on practicing using a mute apart from not bothering the neighbors? Right. Anytime you do something like that as an experiment, there is benefit. There's benefit to anything that you do like that to change things up. If you have to practice on a regular basis on the mute, that's usually frowned upon because it can mess you up. So like if you have to go months like that, it can actually mess you up. The first time I heard, and I'm not going to mention names, I don't think the dude's even playing anymore. And I also don't think it's a coincidence that the chop problems he had time-wise are during the same time he was doing playing only in the mute. I don't think that's a coincidence. So you could say that's a chance that playing in the mute ended his career, and he was a pro. I won't say who it was, because I don't put people down here. And I won't even hint towards it, but there's someone I know who had to quit playing because the chop problems just spiraled out of control. I could have helped him, but he didn't like me. Right? When you're like new in town and you're like the rookie, and just because so I've known stuff about teaching trumpet for a long, long, long time. And there's people who consider themselves my, they're in terms of how long they've been here and stuff like that, they're above me. But I could help a lot of them out, really. I guess that sounds kind of arrogant, but now that said, the guys I work with typically don't need any help. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that I think I could help everybody in town. I'm talking about the ones in town that struggle. And those aren't the top tier players. And there's a reason for that, right? If they're struggling, they're not top tier. Right? Okay, anyway. So there's always benefit to doing stuff like playing in a mute, because what it does is it changes the back pressure, and that's going to change the way you tongue, and it just gives your subconscious mind more data to process. Okay, and it can, yes, it can make you a much better player. Oh, Dave. So, Dave, next week we're going to be earlier. Okay, I'm moving it forward for the for the for the European guys. Okay, we're going to move up 3 hours so that the Europeans can get in on action. Okay, AC, how you doing? I hope things are going well for you. We have enough time for one question. Which model is best for lead playing, Shoki B5 or Old Super, in your opinion? Yeah, I wouldn't know. Sorry, I'm not like the Oracle. I can't. There's some things I don't know, and on the equipment side, I don't know anything about brands, and you know what I mean, about specific brands. I do know about how trumpets are designed and stuff like that. I'm not familiar enough with a B5 or the Old Super for that matter. So I can't really give you a good answer on that one. No, I don't play on a 3C. AC asks if I play on a 3C. I play on a mouthpiece called Huge. It's huge. No, not 3C. 3C is far from huge. You know, I was looking. 3C and 5C are almost the same mouthpiece. It's the same rim. It's just got a different bowl. Believe it or not. I didn't know that until recently. So that means that the 3C isn't that much different from the 7C, which explains a lot of things. Any other questions? I've got a few more minutes left. I'm going to remind everybody one more time, okay? We're going to 1 o'clock next week. That's 1 o'clock Houston time. Yes, the Javier says Shoki 24 is the bigger mouthpiece. Yes, Shoki is the opposite of Shoki is the opposite of the other sizes. Shoki, the bigger the number, the bigger the size. The smaller the number, the smaller the size, except for their Symphony series, which is what I play. The Symphony series in Shoki sizes is like the box sizes in terms of the numbers. I mean, I'm not saying that the numbers match. I'm saying that the numbers are sequential, like one is the biggest and it goes up from there. Okay. So yes, Anthony, 7C and 5C are closer than no, that's not what I said. So yeah, well, it's the same thing. 7C, 5C and 3C are practically the same mouthpiece, and 7C is just the next size up or down, depending on how you're looking at it. So it's really only one size difference, if I'm understanding it correctly. Okay. AC says, I'm looking into getting a bigger mouthpiece. So that's good. Okay. In December after marching band. Okay. That's a good idea. And once again, I would recommend if you can find some place that has different sizes, because just getting bigger just to get bigger may not be the best way to do it. Try stuff out. Okay? All right. Well, very good, guys. Thanks for hanging out with me. It was great to hang out with you guys. We're going to try to keep these to an hour for now. If we get way too many questions, we'll do what we can. But And I do apologize. I don't know why my chat wasn't scrolling. Now I know what that blue arrow is. So anyway, thanks again. God bless you guys. We'll see you next week. I'm looking forward to it. Bye.